share the process. And so I didn't come and tell you what I realized. I started with the process. Thanks. I started with the process of how I reached that realization. Okay? And so, notice. Okay? And suddenly I had a realization starts to form. Blah, 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 blah. I still didn't tell you what the realization is. Blah, 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 blah. Getting rid of the ego is now easier. I'll share this realization with you in part 2. Part 2 is the next day, essentially.
Okay.
It's just because, yeah, I don't do it on purpose. So, no, I don't have a lot of time to write. So, sandwich. Okay? In this instance, a sandwich is a lot more powerful than a sandwich that just closes the loop. It's a sandwich that reminds you of everything that happened, and it reminds you why it's important for you to read the next note. It creates an extremely powerful hook when you can link a sandwich effect with curiosity, very powerful. Curiosity, and something that appeals to you, a topic that you care about, that's even more powerful. And so, if you care about that, then I write to you, because I write to me and I care about that. Yes?
But this only works for blogging, right? It doesn't work for like, well, if you're using social media for Facebook or for...
Yes, it does.
Or for like YouTube, if you're creating a video, it works the same way, like you create a sandwich effect.
When you come to TEDxBeirut, watch the speakers and see. Okay? It works in a lot of things. It's just about, it's all about creating the context for an association and then bringing back that initial association.
Like, could you give us an example, like how would you use that for shorter texts? The sandwich effect, how would you do that in shorter space? Like if you had
a tweet?
Yeah, or Facebook. If you have a small space, how could you squeeze that in?
Example.
The same thing, it could be the same idea over there.
Yeah. You can think of anything like that. Basically, the way it works, even if, specifically in terms of a sandwich, the closer they are together, the less impactful it is, right? So, specifically, the example of a sandwich might not work in a tweet, right? Unless you can totally distract the audience in the middle. So, for example, I mean, all the examples that I'm giving you right now is not just about the writing itself. Of course, the writing needs to work, but it's about everything that creates the whole experience of your audience. So think of a tweet. Let's say I say, okay, and then suddenly a realization starts to form, and I give you a link, and then you click on the link, and you get to an article that doesn't talk about realization, and then at the end of the article, I'll share this realization with you. So that's a sandwich effect that links back to the tweet. The link could be a picture, right? I could say something, the link could take you to an image that has nothing to do with what I said in the tweet. And then at the end of the comment under the picture, I could link back to that. Okay? So don't always think within the space of the words themselves. Sometimes if you're thinking of Facebook, you could write a comment on the wall. And then you could, during the day, write 3 or 4 or 5 other comments. And then you could say something that reminds people of how the day started with that first comment that you posted. And if you were trying to get a message across with using a lot of these Facebook wall posts, then connecting back to that first wall post will have them remove themselves from the noise of everything that's happening on Facebook and seeing a bird's eye view of what you're trying to say. So it works on a lot of levels, this specific example. Okay, everything I've said before also works on shorter things, like a tweet. You could either say, I want to change the world I just happen to make computers, that's a tweet. Or, I have computers and they're loaded with features. Right? So does every other computer in the world. Okay? And now maybe I could talk a bit about what, so this is now all about creating the hook, being able to deliver the message, and then closing it in a way. Okay, but what keeps people reading what happens in here? Why don't they stop in the middle? How do you make sure that they actually reach the realization at the end to close the sandwich, for example? Right?
You have to build it.
Sorry?
The storytelling in the middle, that you made it like...
You could write a lot of stories and people could stop at any time. I'm not saying that's the wrong answer. I mean, if the storytelling, if you know how your storytelling then works.
Yeah.
You want to say something?
No, I was just thinking on that. There must be a way that you can build, people's attention as further along as you write. So there must be.
Okay.
I'm guessing that.
How?
Maybe it present directly what you're saying.
Okay.
You promise them something. You give them a little bit and then you promise them again. Remind them of the promise.
Or maybe use keywords from your...
That works if they really want what you're offering, or else they will not keep up with you. It's basically, yeah, you were saying something.
Maybe like you used your sandwich effect, but you don't have to say that. You can create many things from the environment that it inspires. So you keep on giving me a hint. It's not the word, it's the feeling, it's the place, it's the context, it's who I might meet. And you keep me plugged in with the promise that the carrot is right here. It's getting closer.
It works if you understand how these things work, or else it's just throwing the dice and hoping that it will work. Right? So, and that's why, I mean, my intention behind all of this is not to tell you the things that you can go and do. It's for you to understand all the dynamics of all of this so that you're more aware of it. And once you're aware of it, then you can replicate it without having to depend on a stroke of luck, basically. And so, one of the things that work and that keep the reader engaged is, it's not a term that I came up with. They call it the roller coaster effect. What's a roller coaster? Right. And there's a point where it's going up slowly, right? And you're waiting to die. And you're there and your heart is beating faster and faster and faster and faster. And then you reach the climax, and that's the most emotionally charged moment. And from there it's literally downhill, and emotionally downhill and all this. Okay? Imagine there's a roller coaster ride, but the uphill takes an hour. Would your emotions still stay increasing gradually? You get to a certain point where you're like, right? Imagine the roller coaster is going downhill for an hour. At some point, I mean, you acclimatize in a way, and things somehow start moving very slowly, or all of the roller coaster could be very, very fast. And that's what you don't want to do in your text and in your copy. You don't want to create a roller coaster ride where the uphill lasts an hour and the downhill lasts an hour. And so if people are reading for 5 minutes, don't spend 2.5 minutes building up to the climax and 2.5 minutes leading down. Okay? Social media doesn't work like movies. Okay? Although in movies they do have a roller coaster ride, because they have a plan. And so if you think of, let's say, a movie, and so let's say I'll oversimplify it, because in a movie, so they build up to the climax and then they go down to the resolution. Okay? What we're not aware of as audience, I mean, you would be if you watch Lost a lot, because they do that intensely. But what they're doing is actually they're giving you a mini roller coaster ride while going up. So there is a big plot and a big conflict building up, leading to the climax. But along the way, it's not boring because they create a small problem and then they resolve it, and they create another problem and then they resolve it, etc. And what Lost does and what Prison Break does is they do a lot of these in parallel. So it's basically, let's say they're building to a problem, and then another problem starts. So this problem resolves, but that problem keeps going, right? And while this problem is going, there's another problem that here, and it's resolved, but this keeps going. So that's why they really hook you, and once you start watching them, it's extremely hard to stop. Okay, because it's not one thing that is keeping you hooked, it's many smaller zillion hooks together. And that's a roller coaster ride. And remember when I gave the example, this brings us back to when I said when you start with a solution, it's boring. Imagine you go on a roller coaster ride and it starts downhill. Right? I mean, okay, it's a bit of fun. When you build up to it, it's a lot stronger. And that's why starting with a problem, okay, creates the uphill effect. Okay, because it charges the emotions, it charges curiosity and all this. So you build up to it and then you go down. I'm not suggesting that you create this, but what you do is close to what Sharif suggested. So let's say I have a problem that, let's say the problem is my ego is eating me up, and it's thank you, and it's not allowing me to move forward in life. Okay, and you want to read this because you want to know how I resolve my ego issue. Okay, and so I say that this is the ego, and then I build some context, and the moment you start forgetting that there is an ego problem, I could say, but this reminds me of when my ego got triggered when I was right? And then I add some more context, I resolve some, I diffuse some objections, etc. And once the reader starts forgetting what the problem is, I bring back the problem again, and it creates this roller coaster ride. So it basically takes the reader on an emotional ride, and he reaches the end. It actually flows. So he's not waiting to reach the end because he's engaged all the way. So he forgets that he's reading, he forgets that he needs to get to the end, and he's experiencing your words, basically. And that's what a roller coaster effect does. To actually demonstrate it and read some notes will take a lot of time, but you could go in and read a few of them. I'm not claiming that it's in there in a lot of them, because a lot of them they're really quick personal notes that I just put online. What I can suggest that you do is don't take all of these and try to implement all of them, because it's not about knowing them, it's about making them habits. Okay? And so pick your favorite and say, for the next 3 months or 2 months, I'm going to have the awareness of that favorite of mine when I'm reading something, when I'm writing something, when I'm interacting with someone. And at some point it will become automatic. So let's say it's the sandwich effect, you do it without thinking. And that's when you pick your next favorite, and you create awareness around it until it becomes your next habit. And by the end of a year, you would have picked up such a lot of these habits that when you're writing, even if it's just a quick note to yourself, they're just there without you having to think about them.